So, normally I wait a whole week after the offseason begins where free agents are starting to be signed and players are traded, but in this particular situation with the NBA offseason being shortened due to the NBA trying to have a quick turnaround with the upcoming year, I decided to go ahead and drop the biggest winners and losers of this year's offseason. Hopefully nothing too big happens that makes this video completely obsolete, and also make sure you hit the subscribe button because like I've been promising, I'm dropping more videos on this channel because of the situation that we are in with the NBA season coming up in less than a month. So make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell so you can be updated as soon as I upload these videos. But with all of that out of the way, let's get right into the winners and losers. So my first winners are the Philadelphia 76ers. After having another disappointing year, which concluded with a first-round exit, it was very clear that the Sixers needed to revamp, and it was more than just the personnel that needed to see some major changes. In the front office, the Sixers decided to bring on Daryl Morey as an executive, and also decided to make a decision with their head coach by firing Brett Brown and bringing in Doc Rivers. Those two moves alone, in my opinion, would have made the Sixers instant winners, but they also decided to make some changes with their roster as well. The two most important ones are trading Al Horford and Josh Richardson, and in return they brought in Danny Green and Seth Curry. Now on the surface this may seem like this is a drop in talent, and honestly it potentially could be. However, the Sixers' main problem over the past couple of years is that they didn't have the proper personnel that fit alongside Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid to figure out what is the true potential of that young duo. And so when it comes to Danny Green and Seth Curry, even though it may be a drop in talent, it adds some three-point shooting, and when it comes to Danny Green, it adds some ability on the defensive end as well. They also brought in Dwight Howard, who I believe will be a great backup for Joel Embiid, and a player that I believe went underneath the radar for the Sixers is Terrence Ferguson, who may not be a household name, but definitely adds some diversity to their bench, which is something that they have been lacking over the past 2 years. Now, all in all, this may not seem like any major moves for an organization that should be competing for a championship sooner than later, but regardless if it is true when it comes to the lateral move of talent, it still allows us to figure out what the Sixers have in both Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, and what is the true value of that duo leading the charge for this team. So I'm going to give the Sixers a B+. Another winner that I have for this year's offseason are the Charlotte Hornets, and to keep it fairly short and simple, they not only signed Gordon Hayward, but they found their franchise player in the draft in LaMelo Ball. Now first, when it comes to Gordon Hayward, the contract size is pretty questionable, especially the amount of money that he's being paid as well on a year-to-year basis. But besides that, drafting LaMelo Ball for a Charlotte Hornets team that clearly needs a face to their franchise is extremely important. So much so that interest in Hornets basketball is possibly the highest it has been in years, including the Kemba Walker era. And not only that, I do believe with LaMelo Ball's size, his potential, especially when it comes to passing and feel for the game, he not only is a great fit for the Hornets, but also has the potential of being the best player in this year's draft. So again, great overall offseason for the Charlotte Hornets, and I'm going to give them an A. Now, first moving on to my first losers of this year's offseason, and I have to give it to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Minnesota's in a situation where they have to start competing consistently for a playoff berth, and quite frankly, I don't think any of their acquisitions in this year's offseason helps them in those regards, outside of a potential Ricky Rubio revamp that allows another veteran to come in and provide some consistency in the backcourt. But quite honestly, I don't even know if that's going to really work with D'Angelo Russell as ball dominant as a player that he is. Furthermore, when it comes to Anthony Edwards, sure, it makes sense. He is a 2-guard. He fits right in at a position that needs to be addressed for the Timberwolves. But what he may provide for the roster in athleticism and his ability to drive to the basket, again, just might not be enough, especially since this team needs a lot of attention to the defensive end of the floor. And losing James Johnson makes it even more prevalent that defensively they will struggle this upcoming season. So I give the Timberwolves, unfortunately, a D. Up next, we have the New Orleans Pelicans, and honestly, I'm a bit indifferent about the Pelicans' moves this offseason. First things first, they started out really strong, moving Drew Holiday and in return receiving Eric Bledsoe and a bunch of draft picks. Granted, Eric Bledsoe might be a downgrade, but I don't believe the gap between Holiday and Bledsoe is that significant, and even if you believe it is, the amount of draft assets that they received in return should definitely make up for that lack of talent. But on the other hand, the Pelicans lost E'Twaun Moore, which I believe can truly hurt them in the long run, largely because of the lack of floor spacing. And to add even further to that potential problem, they decided to go after Steven Adams and then sign him to an extension. Now granted, Steven Adams might be a really good locker room guy, and I do believe for his age he has seen a lot of playoff experience, so he may be able to add some value to a team that needs a little bit more veteran leadership and someone who may understand how to win basketball games. But when it comes to the actual fit for Steven Adams on this team, I just don't like it. Steven Adams isn't a floor spacer, he doesn't really provide that much offensively, and even when it comes to the defensive end of the floor, yes, he is a solid rim protector, but in today's league, you need a little bit more versatility on that side of the court when it comes to big men, especially when it comes to the switches. And on a team with Zion Williamson, Eric Bledsoe, and potentially Lonzo Ball being a bit inconsistent with his three-point shooting, offensively, this team that should be really experimenting on some of their lineups may become a bit more stagnant. So honestly, I'm a bit indifferent when it comes to the Pelicans, and because of this, I'm going to give them a C+. Now, moving on to the Phoenix Suns, who are big winners in this year's offseason. This is an organization that needs to see some type of progress. In this year's offseason, not only they make the additions, but with the natural progression of some of the young players, it should be a no-brainer that the Suns should be in competition to make the 8th seed out west. And a huge reason why I say this, of course, is their acquisition of Chris Paul. Not only does CP3 give them some veteran leadership, but also adds a little bit more on the defensive end than Ricky Rubio was able to for this organization. Also, offensively, CP3 is obviously more capable of Ricky Rubio, and I also believe the maturation of Devin Booker will only be aided by the presence of Chris Paul on this organization, and that backcourt is definitely deadly in this upcoming offseason. Furthermore, adding E'Twaun Moore provides a little bit more three-point shooter, and Jay Crowder, who also can be able to space out the floor, but more importantly, gives some more defensive veteran leadership, that grit and grind that this organization desperately needs. So I love what Phoenix did. Obviously, the only question that anyone would have is Chris Paul and the contract that he received. The amount of money that he's being paid is certainly questionable, and you also have to deal with injury problems that potentially could arise with having CP3 on the team. And because of that, instead of me giving them an A+, I'm gonna give them an A-. But nevertheless, massive winners in this year's offseason. Now, my next loser this year's offseason are the Toronto Raptors, and honestly, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Not only did they lose Marc Gasol, but they also lost Serge Ibaka and didn't receive really anything in return for neither one of them. Also, even though yes, they were able to bring back Fred VanVleet, I do believe roughly $20 million a year is a bit much for him, but I still don't believe that's enough to really justify them falling in any other category outside of being losers. So yes, the Toronto Raptors, a team that might find themselves on the wrong side of the playoff bracket in this upcoming season, are definitely losers. Up next, we have the Los Angeles Lakers, who I believe are the biggest winners in this year's offseason. After losing Danny Green, Dwight Howard, Avery Bradley, and Rajon Rondo, one can make a very sound argument that in all regards, they've either A, made a lateral move in talent or potentially gotten better. Replacing Rondo with Dennis Schroeder, Wesley Matthews should be able to provide just as much as Danny Green, if not more, when it comes to consistent three-point shooting. Then you have Montrezl Harrell coming off the bench, providing even more offense, something that the Lakers struggled with last year. And finally, you have Marc Gasol, who is a better fit than Dwight Howard thanks to his floor spacing, but also adds a complexity to an offense thanks to his playmaking and passing that, quite frankly, the Lakers needed with their dependency on LeBron and Anthony Davis periodically throughout the year. So again, massive winners for the Lakers. I believe the biggest winners in this year's offseason, and of course, I have to give them an A+. And since we're talking about the Lakers, we might as well pivot to the Clippers, who I have as losers. Granted, even though I do like the Serge Ibaka acquisition because I do believe he's a better fit for the team than Montrezl Harrell, and also I like Luke Kennard, I still believe that the Clippers are losers in this year's offseason, not only because they didn't address their potential ball handling problems that apparently they had even last year, but also the gap between the Lakers and the Clippers is even more identifiable. And with the Clippers' future being in question, largely because of the contract situation from both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, having just an okay offseason, quite frankly, isn't enough for an organization that needs to win a championship for this upcoming year. And to make matters worse, there's another team out west that has gotten better that, quite frankly, I don't even know if the Clippers were better than them last year if they were healthy, and that team is Dallas. This year, they come back with the same offensive scheme, but a little bit better defensively, as they swapped out Seth Curry with Josh Richardson in a trade with Philly, and they also brought in James Johnson, which should add to the floor spacing that will be a catalyst to the Mavericks offense for the foreseeable future, but more importantly, will continue to add to the defensive end of the floor, which is something that the Mavericks struggled with last year. Now, of course, these acquisitions don't feel like the biggest moves that could be made, which is why I'm going to give the Dallas Mavericks a B+ instead of an A. But these acquisitions do address a problem that the Mavericks had last year while still keeping their identity on the offensive end. Up next, we have the Boston Celtics, and this is another team where I am a bit indifferent. In short, I do like the acquisitions of Tristan Thompson and Jeff Teague because both of those players address a problem that the Celtics had last year, and that is depth when it comes to ball handling and playmaking, as well as interior presence when it comes to both defense and rebounding. However, losing Gordon Hayward and receiving nothing for him in return is definitely concerning, not only because that is basically $30 million that is now lost when it comes to juggling contracts that easily could have filled out the rest of the roster when it comes to depth, but yet again, this is another player that left a lot of money on the table to leave Boston. But with the loss of Gordon Hayward, I do believe there are some positives that come along with that. The most important one is that both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum will receive bigger roles in this upcoming season, which I believe is great for the Boston Celtics all around. So because of this, I'll give Boston a high C+ to nearing a B-. Up next, we have the Portland Trail Blazers, and not only are they winners, but I love what this Trail Blazers team was able to do to their roster, because they finally addressed the biggest concern that they've had since they've made Damian Lillard the face of the franchise, and that is getting some defensive presence on the perimeter. They not only brought in Robert Covington, but they also brought in Derrick Jones Jr., two defensive-oriented wing players who, because of their size, can also bring you some versatility when it comes to switching. Furthermore, they not only brought back Carmelo Anthony, but they also was able to sign Enes Kanter, which adds even more offense to a front court that has been a bit stagnant over the past couple of years. Again, I just love what the Portland Trail Blazers did. I give them an A+ because I don't really think there's much else they could have done to this roster. Up next, we have the Atlanta Hawks, and honestly, I'm a bit indifferent. Now, this may take a lot of people by surprise, and no, I'm not just saying this so I can have a hot take in this video, but I'm not the biggest fan of some of the acquisitions from Atlanta. When it comes to Chris Dunn and Rondo, I actually like what both of these players could potentially provide to this team. In the backcourt, it adds another ball handler that should add some complexity to Trae Young's game, but more importantly, on the defensive end, it definitely addresses a major problem that they have with this backcourt. And with a full season of Clint Capella and hopefully a full healthy season with John Collins, just naturally this team will progress into the conversation of competing for a playoff spot out east. The one concern that I do have, however, is the Danilo Gallinari acquisition. Granted, Gallinari does provide this team with consistent offense, a player that you more than likely can rely on for around 18 to 20 points on a night-to-night basis. However, I personally don't believe that was a major concern for Atlanta, and committing $20+ million on a year-to-year basis for a player that is going to add something that you more than likely could have received with some of the other younger players that you already had on this roster, to me is highly questionable. And on top of the fact that Gallinari doesn't really provide anything on the defensive end, and also we're talking about an injury-prone player, it is a massive risk and quite frankly a pretty hefty financial commitment for a team that again is only battling for an 8th seed. In my opinion, the playing time and the role that will be given to Gallinari will be best suited to be given to some of the younger players to really see what you have with some of these young pieces that you drafted over the past 2 or 3 years. But nevertheless, I still cannot deny that it is an upgrade from what they have, and because of this, I will give the Atlanta Hawks a C+ to a B-. Up next, we have the Milwaukee Bucks, and I'm not going to spend too much time on Milwaukee, largely because I've already made a video on how I feel about the direction of Milwaukee, and I'll leave that at the end of the video. But in short, I do like the acquisition of Jrue Holiday because I believe it is an upgrade from Eric Bledsoe, especially because of what Jrue Holiday can do offensively in contrast to Bledsoe, as well as the versatility on the defensive end. And granted, even though Bogdan Bogdanovic will not be making his way to Milwaukee, the Bucks still were able to sign a lot of other quality floor spacers that should be able to produce for this team throughout the regular season. Granted, losing Wesley Matthews is also a major hit, so I won't be able to give the Bucks an A like I originally did in my first video, but giving them a B+ is still justifiable even with the loss of Wesley Matthews and also those draft picks that they gave up during the Jrue Holiday transaction. Up next, we have the Houston Rockets, and honestly, I think it's pretty self-explanatory why they're the biggest losers in this year's offseason. Granted, they did not trade Russell Westbrook nor James Harden yet, but it is inevitable as both of those stars have voiced their grievances and demanded to be traded sooner than later. So unfortunately, having two stars request trades in the same offseason that you lost not only your coach, but also your general manager, who I believe Daryl Morey was one of the better GMs in the NBA, is a lot to lose in one offseason. And to make matters worse, this is an organization that moved a lot of assets to acquire Russell Westbrook just a year ago. So with all that being said, people, please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell, leave a comment in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.